This year we've had conditions really favoring some of our bacterial diseases, both in corn and soy. And how many of you seen bacterial blight in soybean this year? Okay, quite a bit of that going on. We've got, we had stormy conditions. That's a disease that it's favored by some sort of wounding on the plant, like a lot of our bacterial diseases. So a lot of times with that, that's that upper left picture in there. You see that yellow halo around the lesions a lot of times. You look on the underside of the leaf, you'll see that water-soaked area. That type of response, usually right associated with the damage in the canopy. So if you have a hailstorm and then later you got regrowth above that, down in that damage zone is where you tend to see that, or high-speed winds, sandblasting, that type of thing. That disease does not like high temperatures, so the week like this, it's going to go away. Okay, if it is there, it's not going to spread much. Typically, we don't talk about it as a yield-reducing problem. On the right side of that slide, though, you see that those little dots along the veins of the leaf. That's bacterial pustule. Now that's the one that a few years back when we were talking about soybean rust identification a lot. That looks just like that. It's got that little raised pustule. Follows the veins a lot of times, favored by warmer temperatures. So I don't know that at 100 you're going to see a lot of bacterial pustule, but low 90s, warmer temperatures in that window, you could see that. And that's usually one that's in the upper portion of the canopy. Now one of the things with both of these bacterial diseases would be differences with varieties. So there is genetic resistance specifically to pustule. I've seen real clear reactions to that. This one will have it, this one will have none. Okay, blight you tend to see a little in all of them, but some varieties are a lot more susceptible than others. So a little bit differences there. Now both of those you're not going to see any benefit from the fungicide application, right? But the one that you will is brown spot. And that's in the middle of that board, that disease that's on the lower portion of the canopy. Does that yellowing that you see. Usually when beans are, somewhere like these, a little bit further along and beyond that. For sure when you get a full canopy, you start to see those canopies start to senesce a little bit and yellowing. And if you look close, you'll see those darker lesions on those leaves working its way up from the bottom up. And that's really the one that in soybean is most common, and is one that if you make a fungicide application, you could have some benefit from. So with soybean, though, when we look at timing on soy, we've done a lot of timing work, and a lot of things are out there, and all the recommendations on that pretty much consistent with R3. Okay, so right when you start to get pods in those top 4 nodes, when you see that, that's your time. That is the point for both disease control and but more critically, that's the time when if you're going to get the plant health response, that's the timing. Another one that excuse me, we're just starting to see more of in the state, and is one that those R3 applications would have an effect on, is frog eye leaf spot. How many of you have seen frog eye in your soybeans this year, or in the past years? Just starting this now. Okay, we got a few. This one is one you'll see it increase over time. We'll start seeing more of it. It is one that varieties vary a lot in their susceptibility to. There is resistance to frog eye. On there you see those nice circular lesions. And I'm sorry, those aren't larger pictures, but there also I've got a picture with the non-treated and the treated. Loren fungicides do a great job on frog eye leaf spot. So if you have a field that has that, the disease is going to be favored by anything that favors keeping residue. So, continuous cropping, no-till, those are going to be factors that really favor that residue to have the disease present. If you do make any applications and you've got frog eye and you see it continuing, then that's where you'd be concerned about resistance. And the resistance for Cercospora to strobilurin fungicides is different than what you see like with your tolerance to glyphosate and weed species, how you can increase rates. With Cercospora and strobilurins, it's an on and off response. So it works, and then you make the application, it doesn't work at all. It's a complete failure. It doesn't matter how much you put on. It doesn't matter if you change from Avito to Headline to Stratego or Quadris, they all don't work. Okay, it's that they're all different compounds, but they all work exactly the same way on the fungus. But once that changes, they don't work. Other thing I want to point out, just on the stem and root rots that we've got pictured there, we have the sclerotinia, we've got the SDS, the Phytophthora. All of those over the last few years, I've heard people say, well, couldn't we make that, strobilurin application and help the health of the plant so we'll defend against some of those? That doesn't work.
All right, folks. So in our corn, we're not seeing very much disease pressure just yet. We're just starting to see some disease show up a little bit, and mainly I'm talking about gray leaf spot. And so things that you'd be considering to use a fungicide for, mainly gray leaf spot, but diagnosis is critical because there are several things showing up that can be confusing to diagnose and might be easily mixed up with some of those other fungal diseases. And so, of course, for gray leaf spot in particular, starting on the left-hand side of our slide up here, the diseases that can be controlled with a fungicide, those caused by fungi. So starting with gray leaf spot, remember you got to look for those rectangular gray lesions, and some of them are really small right now, so some of these little tan lesions we're starting to see show up. That's gray leaf spot starting really early on there. Other diseases, of course, we talk more about southern rust, and that's because of problems we've had in the past. In 2006, I imagine several of you came out of the field orange, and especially if you were in that south central part of the state. And so, knowing the losses that we experienced because of the epidemic we had that year, we still have a lot of emotional responses about southern rust and our fears of that happening again. Well, we've got two rust diseases on corn. The first one is common rust, and we tend to see a little bit of common rust every year, not worry too much about it. How to tell common rust from southern rust is where the spores are produced. And so for common rust, the spores are produced equally well on both the upper and lower leaf surfaces. And although there is a color difference, unless you have them side by side, that color difference may not be much help for you. Now, one thing you'll notice though is you can see spores developing on that upper leaf surface here, but you don't really see any yet on the bottom, but it looks like the epidermis is bubbling up a little bit. Well, if you use your fingernail or your pocket knife, you can peel that back and you can see there's some spores down in there. Okay, I don't have an example of southern rust, I'm happy to say, but if we do start to see southern rust move into the area, you'll see that show up on crop watch. The reason we worry more about southern rust is because it's a more aggressive pathogen, and so that pathogen is able to reproduce more quickly, cause disease more severely, and so that's the one we really are more concerned about monitoring for. Because it likes warmer temperatures, we tend to see it later in the season than we see common rust. This is about the time of year we might start seeing something like that. The good news about rust disease is they don't overwinter on corn in Nebraska in our residue. That's good news. It has to blow in every year, so we look to states south of us to kind of indicate when things are moving up this way. All right, next one, eye spot. We've seen a little bit of eye spot the last few years. Eye spot is a cool season disease. That's not one that you need to worry about once it gets hot. It's going to go away. And so in the southwest part of the state and across northern Nebraska and Iowa, we've seen a little bit of it. It'll shut down in temperatures like we've had recently. So these are the main ones we talk about for as far as foliar diseases go that can be managed well with a fungicide. Now, there's a lot of stuff though that can't be managed, and those are the main ones I want you to pay attention to because a misdiagnosis can cost you quite a bit of money. Now, typical for Gauss's wilt are these big, long, gray lesions like that that look a lot like a lot of other things that you guys see on a daily basis. There are two things I want you to look for when this leaf comes around. The first one is a diagnostic characteristic that no other pathogen can cause, and that's the presence of these dark green or almost black freckles. And those freckles are going to be on the edge of the lesion, the leading edge. So infection took place back here and it's working its way up the leaf. Now you see some what looks like freckles back here in the dead part of the lesion. That's not what I'm talking about. That's sporulation of other fungi that have moved in and colonized that dead material. But it confuses a lot of folks because it looks like what I'm talking about. Also, when you look at this, look really close, and actually I see a little bit now. It's a little bit easier out in the sunlight to see this. The exudate, the bacteria are secreted on the surface of the leaf, and so as that dries, it can give the surface a little glossy look. Holcus spot is not something we usually get bent out of shape about. Now this year, for whatever reason, we're seeing more Holcus spot than we've seen in the past. There we go. Holcus spot causes little tan lesions, kind of nondescript, doesn't really have a diagnostic feature about it exactly, but you know, it can be confused with some of these other fungal diseases. If you're in the southwest part of the state or western Nebraska around the Panhandle, we are seeing some more bacterial diseases like chocolate spot. Again, this is one that will go away once it gets hot, so not worried about it by this time. You tend to see that on the margins of plant. One that you might be seeing or smelling is some bacterial stalk rot. In areas where we've had heavy rain in the past, and now we've had a lot of heat, that's where we tend to see bacterial stalk rot development. And it can start from the top of the plant working its way down, or at the bottom of the plant, particularly if it's been standing in water. There's a few other things going on too that might give you some diagnostic headaches, things that people often have questions about. One of them that we see every year that I'm going to tell you not to worry about, this is called purple leaf sheath. And so the spot I'm showing here that's about, actually a little bit bigger than real size. That spot's probably about this big. And you might recognize that it's right under the collar of that leaf. And so after pollination, when you've had a collection of pollen and the anthers in that leaf, and they get down in there, we have fungi come in to break that down. And it can actually cause a leaf spot down in that collar in particular. Well, most of the time it doesn't go any further than that. Alright folks, one more disease you might be seeing, because we have had a lot of rain earlier in the season, not so much now, is physoderma. And people get bent out of shape about physoderma because it looks a lot like southern rust if you're just passing through because of this orange tan color. But if you do your finger and thumb test on there, you're not going to find the spores that you would have seen with that severe of an infection of southern rust. So that's your first clue. Also, you might notice it occurs often in bands across the leaf. This is a water fungus or a water mold. It has swimming spores and it needs standing water. So often you'll have infection develop in the whorl when it's acting like a cup and holding that water. And so you have alternating cycles of wet and dry in that cup as you irrigate or have rainfall events. And so you get banding patterns across the leaf as infection occurs as it pushes up through that whorl. In a nutshell, if you were going to spray one time, I'd say wait till VT or shortly thereafter, within a couple weeks after that. That's when we've had our most consistent results in our trials conducted at Clay Center at the South Central Ag Lab. And in that environment, we have had very successful results with fungicides that are contradictory to some of our neighboring states that might have, say, less disease pressure. Now, when you look, though, during a year when we've had low disease pressure, like in 2010, I think pretty similar to what we've got this year at this point. In 2010, we saw some yields jumping around, but some yield increases on some of these products, but you know, really we had some inconsistency in yield and no significant treatment differences statistically. And so that's probably a common theme, but yield really isn't the only thing that we look at as far as impacts from some of these products. When we acknowledge some of the plant health benefits, we have not been able to capture those plant health benefits in our results in the past. And knowing they have some unpredictability, we've not recommended that people spray just for the plant health benefit. This was the first year I felt confident that we were able to measure something like that. And so even in a low disease environment like we had in 2010, we did have significant improvements in our standability. Now, if you compare that to what we've seen in the past at Clay Center, where we have had significant disease, like in 2009, where we had a really humid stint, a lot of gray leaf spot developed, even by tasseling. During a year where we have significant disease, we see great results with all these products. Folks talking about timing, application timing, we have gotten good results 2 or 3 weeks after tasseling, so you're still in a good window to treat if you're going to do that. We've waited till as late as Dent, making sequential applications, and had good results up through early dough if you've got significant disease. Now in a low disease environment like this, you know, that can go the other way too. And again, our V5, V6 applications have been infrequently have given us a yield bump to pay for it. Much more so on the VT application. So if I were going to do it, I'd wait.